Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Of the day. This time of year, I'll say this, I think that, listen, everybody's focused on the NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, maybe college baseball. But as I always say, this is a very important time on the calendar for college basketball, as crazy as it sounds. The season has been done for probably about 8 weeks now at this point, but the NBA draft deadline is always right around the end of May, always around Memorial Day. This year, it is this coming Wednesday. So when I say coming Wednesday, I mean tomorrow as I'm recording, maybe the day of as you're listening. And coming into the week, there were actually quite a few players that had not made their decision. And what I found interesting was on Monday, a lot of them came off the board. It used to be even 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think because of NIL that has changed some things. But it felt like there was always 7, 8 guys that going into that final day, would they stay? Would they go? Well, a bunch of them came off the board. Today, what I want to do, I want to open the show with about the 7 or 8 big names that were undecided coming into the week, the ones that we do know, and then the 2 or 3 that we don't. So let's start with the big names that this week have decided to withdraw from the draft, return to college hoops, what it means. We're not going to spend, 15 minutes on each player, 3, 4, 5 minutes on each, who they are, the impact that they could have, and what it means for college basketball. So let's get into some of the guys that on Monday actually did withdraw from the draft. Let's start with a guy that I've been talking about here for about, again, 6 to 8 weeks now, because I think he's that good. I think he's that important. Yaxel Lendeborg, transfer from Michigan, okay? Or transfer from UAB. So he plays at UAB last year, and I've said this 100 times. But this was a guy that I started to hear in December and January of teams just kind of feeling around, doing their homework. Would he enter the portal? Because if he would be a difference maker. Well, he ends up entering the portal after a season in which, how about this? Led UAB in every major category, 17 points per game, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, nearly 2 blocks, and 2 steals per game. He goes ahead, commits to Michigan in the portal, but then enters the NBA draft. And he was a fascinating case study in what would this be if he came back, if he didn't. He obviously on Monday came back. And with it, I think this is a huge piece of news for Michigan. Okay, so first of all, why it was interesting was because he was a guy that I do believe if he had stayed in the draft would have been a first-round pick. Now, what makes this interesting, historically, again, we're in this new world with NIL and the transfer portal, but specifically with NIL, guys don't have to rush the process, okay? And so if you were even in consideration for a first-round pick 5 years ago, it wasn't even a debate. You entered and you never looked back. Then over the last 2 or 3 years, it's like, okay, if you're going to be a second rounder, you're not sure, you decide to come back. Now a guy like Yaxel Lendeborg has the opportunity to say, you know what? I might be a first rounder, but I think I can get better. And I think I can improve my draft stock. And even if I'm a first rounder, can I make more in college this year and then set myself up better for the future? And that was the decision that he made. In terms of the decision, I'll be real. I'm both surprised and not surprised. I'm surprised because, again, I'm still in this mindset of if you think you can be in the first round, you go. And I think it was kind of the opposite. I talked to people at the Combine over the last couple days. Now, I was not at the Combine, but I talked to a bunch of people who were. And basically everybody said, like, look, he's a really talented player. But what we have to remember about him, he really didn't play that much basketball as a young kid. He played 1 year of high school basketball, goes to junior college, goes to UAB. And so basically everybody I talked to was like, he still has a lot of growing as a basketball player to do and getting better to do. And this is, again, after he averaged 18, 11, whatever it was at UAB. And so he decides to come back, I think smartly. I think even though he's an older guy, he can improve his draft stock. And listen, we've talked about this since he entered the portal. I think he is a game changer, and I think he's a game changer specifically at Michigan. Listen, I'll release an updated top 25 once we go ahead and get through the draft deadline. But at the same time, when I look at Michigan, listen, they're not a perfect team. Elliot Cadeau is going to be their point guard. He played at North Carolina. A lot of people don't like him, but here's the bottom line. Elliot Cadeau averaged 10.6 assists at Carolina last year. So now you're putting him on a team with a front court of Yaxel Lendeborg, Merez Johnson Jr., and of course Adai Mara. He is going to be a very good point guard, but I think Yaxel Lendenberg is going to be the centerpiece of that team. And I'll just be transparent. I think he is in the short conversation for National Player of the Year. I think he's that good, especially in that system with Dusty May. I think Michigan is in the short conversation for a potential title contender. Tell you a quick side story. I was in Vegas this weekend. I was looking at college basketball futures. Michigan was 25-1 somewhere I saw, and I didn't quite pull the trigger because I was afraid that he was going to end up staying in the draft. So my only anger at Yaxel Lendenberg was, you could have announced this Thursday so I could have gotten some cash in on Michigan. But the bottom line is he's coming back. I think this is good for college basketball. We'll find out in time if it's good for his future, but a year of development. And I think Michigan is going to be a true national championship contender going into next season. Let's keep it going. Next big name on this list, another name that there's no doubt is going to be a national championship conversation, Milos Uzanne. Okay, so Milos Uzanne was the starting point guard this past year on the Houston team that played for a national title. He's another really interesting story. Transferred in this past year from Oklahoma, where ironically he was a teammate at Oklahoma with Otega Owe. So I don't know what that says about the program. But he was a guy, third-year college player this past year, really had a breakout season. But what stood out to me and what was interesting about his decision was, you talk to people in the industry, it was pretty much universal that he declared with the intention to stay in. Averaged 11.5 points, 4.5 assists per game last year. I thought he was maybe Houston's best player by the end of the season. This was a kid, remember, that Purdue game, that shot basically at the buzzer to send Houston to the Elite Eight against Tennessee, that was Milos Uzanne who made the play. And he was a guy that, again, not only averaged 11.5 points per game, but 4.5 assists, 43% three-point shooting, and he's another one. I think he comes back. I think he could be a potential first-team All-American type player next season. Now, what'll be interesting about Houston, listen, I'm going to have him in the top 10. I trust Kelvin Sampson. They returned 3 key players off last year's team, but what I think will be interesting is they are also going to be very young in kind of those backup roles, bench roles, whatever. 3 or 4 key freshmen expected to play. Chris Sinak Jr. is one of the top 10 players in America. Kingston Flemings and Isaiah Harwell. What makes them interesting is I just don't know what to expect from a freshman in the Kelvin Sampson system. But I think this is a different team with Milos Uzanne. I think the fact that he's back, again, he could be the Big 12 player of the year. He could be a first-team All-American, but he is a key player, a key cog on a very, very good Houston team. And I think he solidifies them top 5 going into next year. I think their season will be defined by what happens with the freshmen, but you cannot deny how good this kid is. Let's keep it going. Third guy who pulled out of the draft, the third guy who is very much headed back to a national championship contender, Alex Condon, Florida Gators. So Alex Condon, another interesting one. Started to see about the middle of the year as Florida's playing well. We realized that they're a really good team, maybe even a title contender in December, into January, into February. And you kind of start watching, you say, oh my God, who is this Condon kid? 6'11", runs really well, jumps really high, crazy athletic, plays above the rim, shoots the 3 ball pretty well. And it was really around mid to late January that you started to see him kind of creep up in mock drafts. Thought the back half of the year he didn't play necessarily his best basketball. Played okay in the tournament. Had a good national championship game, but earlier in the tournament struggled. Thought he really struggled against that older Auburn front line. But this is another classic example of a guy that 4 or 5 years ago probably declares and doesn't look back. Now he's sitting there saying, well, wait a second. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be a first-round pick. I just played for a national championship as a sophomore. I developed like crazy year 1 to year 2. I love the guys on the team. Thomas Hawk is my best friend and roommate. I'm going to run it back. I'm going to make some good money playing college basketball, and I'm going to be part of a national championship contender. I'll say this with Florida. With Alex Condon back, they're very much back in the mix for another national title in 2024, 2020, or 2025, 2026, excuse me. Now, listen, I'll say this. I think they're more back end of the top 10 than top 5, top 3. I saw Jeff Goodman tweet out, and I like Jeff. This is not a knock. He said that he thinks the only 3 teams that you can put in consideration for number 1 going into next year are Purdue, Houston, and Florida. I don't know that I feel quite that high on Florida. I like Boogie Flan, but he's got a lot of growing to do. They're going to play probably Hawk at the 3. Is he really more of a 4? So there's stuff for them to figure out. But Florida's entire trajectory of this offseason changed in the last 7 or so days. Boogie Flan commits. He's their starting point guard. Alex Condon announces he's returning. And like I said, they are very much a title contender going into 2025, 2026. They are a team that is good enough to go back-to-back. We hadn't seen back-to-back since 07-08 with the Gators. Well, UConn did it in 23-24, and the Gators could do it in 25-26. A name that we talked about a little bit on Sunday. So if you're subscribed to the pod, this is why you need to be subscribed to YouTube, why you need to be subscribed on podcast. It is because producer Matt, let's go to, if I put them out of order, I apologize. Let's go to Karter Knox because I just gave myself a little tease into Karter Knox. So I apologize if I gave you the wrong order. That's my bad. Karter Knox. So Monday night, he announced that he is returning to Arkansas. We did a full 15-minute reaction. It wasn't like the longest episode ever. But this is a huge piece on a very good Arkansas team. First of all, we talked about this. A lot of revisionist history with Arkansas at the end of the year, okay? And I think it's negative if you're not an Arkansas fan, but if you're an Arkansas fan that watches the games, you know how good Karter Knox is, right? Whenever I say anything positive about Arkansas, we all know what gets said. Oh my goodness, they weren't good. They stink. They lost all their best players. Well, that's just factually not correct at all, okay? And it's not factually correct because Karter Knox was maybe their best player at the end of the season when it counted most. 15 points, 5 rebounds per game over his last 4 games. That included 20 points in that Sweet 16 loss to Texas Tech. And then also 12 points per game over the final month of the season. As a freshman in the SEC, if you average 12 points per game in the toughest games of the year, that is a very good year, and the jump can be made from, freshman year to sophomore year. And so that's why I'm so excited about Karter Knox. That's why I'm so excited about Arkansas. Everybody wants to criticize Cal. Everybody wants to say this. Everybody wants to say that. All I'm here to tell you, at the end of the year, 4 of their most important players were Billy Richmond, Karter Knox, DJ Wagner, and Trevin Brazile, and they are all coming back. I know it's not normal to have retention under John Calipari. That's not a bad thing in this era of college basketball. We talked about the stat a few weeks ago of even in the transfer portal era, every national champion, Kansas in 2022, UConn in 2023 and 2024, and Florida last year, they brought back big chunks of their team, and Arkansas is the same. Thought Karter Knox was by far the most, and I think Karter Knox is probably the most likely to make a leap next season, not only at Arkansas, but I think maybe a breakout player nationally. Like I said, 12 points per game over the final month of the season, 15 in the final 4 games. They were all against tournament teams if you include the SEC tournament against Ole Miss. And so I just think he's the type of player that can have a huge impact. I think he learned some lessons. His brother at Kentucky maybe left a year ahead of schedule. It did not work out for him. Well, Karter Knox is coming back. He will be very well compensated. And I'm here to tell you, I think with Karter Knox, Billy Richmond, as I said, Trevin Brazile, DJ Wagner, the 2 star freshmen, there's 4 freshmen overall, and the 2 key transfers, Malik Ewan and Nick Pringle. I think that team, Arkansas, is very much in contention at the top of the SEC. I said that I think they're the best team in the SEC. I might revisit that if Otega Oweh comes back to Kentucky, but I think the top 3 in some order in the SEC going into next year are Arkansas, Kentucky, and Florida in some order. I think if you picked any of the 3, I don't know that I'd really fight you, but those are the top 3. Arkansas is a completely different team with Karter Knox. Last big announcement of a return, you just saw him briefly on the screen. A guy, I was thinking about this, our first update of the transfer portal. So the transfer portal opened the Monday after the NCAA tournament opening weekend. McKenzie Embako was the first big name. Okay, former top 10 recruit, 2023 class, commits to Indiana, plays 2 years there. He's good but not great. And I think most of that was that Mike Woodson, coaches a style and a system that feels very much like it's out of like 1986. They always had 2 big guys on the floor, not a lot of shooting, not a lot of floor spacing. And I think McKenzie Embako was one of the guys that was hurt by that over the last couple years. Well, I bring it up because he commits to Texas A&M out of the portal. He actually went to the NBA draft combine and was excellent. You read all the reports of people there, and they basically sat there and said, like, he was one of the biggest risers and one of the biggest surprises. Like, I don't think anybody expected much of him. And he very much put himself back in draft consideration probably a year from now after a year at Texas A&M. Well, he's going to A&M. He is a player that I think in that system will be very interesting. So Bucky McMillan is the head coach at Texas A&M. Remember, Buzz Williams left for Maryland. Bucky McMillan plays this fast-paced, up and down, a lot of pressing, a lot of three-point shooting. If you can make threes and you can run and you can score in transition, you can put up a lot of points in that system. That's what McKenzie Embako could do and might do, and he might be one of the more underrated pickups of this offseason. Played really well at the Combine. I think when you added in, I didn't mention earlier, when Milos Uzanne announced he was coming back to Houston, they had a transfer named Pop Isaacs committed who came from Creighton. Pop Isaacs decommitted. He's now going to Texas A&M. I tweeted this out because I do believe that with Pop Isaacs and now McKenzie Embako officially back, I think A&M's a tournament team next year. Now, are they a top 25 team going into the year? Probably not. But very quietly, a nice offseason for them. They added the 7-footer from Texas Tech, Federico. They added Rylan Griffin. I think it's a really good team. Now, I think it's a lot of pieces that got to fit and get figured out. But all things considered, remember, Bucky McMillan was the last power conference coach that I'm aware of to get a job. He got it basically coming out of the Final Four. The portal had already been open for 2 weeks at that point. I thought he did a good job in scramble mode, but I think McKenzie Embako, with how he performed at the Combine, probably the piece that puts them over the top. So those are the big names from the NBA draft deadline to withdraw from the draft. Should mention, by the way, late last week, who was it? Cedric Coward announced that he was staying in the draft. He was supposed to go to Duke. So that was one that we haven't touched on. But I will say, we are about 29 hours from the draft deadline as we're recording here. By the way, depending on how late it goes, we might do a live show on Wednesday night. But there are two names that have not yet officially announced their intentions to stay or go. So let's talk about them quickly. Again, I'll say this: it feels like the group of players that is undecided is much smaller than it's been in the past. But we are recording at 6:22 Eastern time, and unless I missed something over the last 21 minutes since we've been on air, there are still two players that have yet to declare their decision. So let's go ahead and break it down. The first one that I do want to talk about is Kentucky star Otega Oweh. Okay, so Otega Oweh, first of all, again, let's make note. We are recording here at 6:22 Eastern time on Tuesday. So by the time you listen to this, he may have already made his decision, but he is a very interesting one from this perspective. He entered great year at Kentucky. I always said I did not know Otega Oweh was as good as he was. I think part of it was whatever was going on at Oklahoma, it wasn't the right fit. I'm not just going to blame Porter Moser, but he comes to Kentucky, averages 16 points per game, and you go back to the end of the season, he was really their only consistent player. And what I really respected about him was that he was a guy that showed up every single day to play at a time when it's not that players weren't showing up to play for Kentucky. They had so many injuries. Lamont Butler in and out of the lineup. Andrew Carr in and out of the lineup. Jackson Robinson out for the year. And Otega Oweh showed up every single game, had some phenomenal games late in the season, 27 against Oklahoma in the SEC tournament, including what was essentially a buzzer beater, 20 against Troy in the opening round of the tournament, 15 against Illinois in a win, 13 in the loss to Tennessee. He was basically the only one who showed up for that game in the Sweet 16. Well, I bring it up because after the season ends, he declares for the draft. And I remember, I think we might have been live on air when he officially declared. And I remember saying at the time, like, listen, interesting story, but if he wants, listen, all these guys want to play in the NBA, he should declare. And what he should do is go through the process, meet with teams, do interviews, do whatever, get to know NBA people, have NBA people get to know you. But I was like, I don't think he's going to the NBA. I said, I think the money's going to be too good in college. The role is going to be too big. He's going to be the star at freaking Kentucky, and he'll go through the process and come back. Well, I bring it up because we are, as I said, about 29 hours removed from the draft deadline. We have not gotten word. I would argue he and Todd Pedford are the biggest names that, as we're recording, have yet to make an official decision. And I don't want to say that I feel like things are changing because I still think he's coming back to college basketball, but it's certainly getting interesting. And Kentucky fans have watched Florida have a guy come back, Michigan have a guy come back, Arkansas have a guy come back, A&M. I think they're just waiting on Otega Oweh. Like, what are we waiting for, my man? Let's get going here. And so what has changed since the day he declared? I don't know how much has actually changed. First off, I know Kentucky fans kind of at the time, probably about 2 weeks ago, he did an interview where he basically said like, yeah, I'm all in on this process. And I think the thought process was, wow, he's all in. He doesn't want to come back to Kentucky. It's like, I didn't perceive that comment that way. It was actually, to me, the opposite. Is that's kind of what you want to hear from a guy, right? If you're doing something, do it to the 100% of your ability. And I think all it really said was, like every young player, he wants to play in the NBA. And so if he's going to take 6-8 weeks out of his life to prepare for the NBA draft, go at it 100% and really put yourself in position to get drafted. And so that's what I believe he did. And the thing with Otega Oweh that is so different than so many of these guys with the stay or go decision, he actually played well at the combine. Now, a lot of these guys have pulled out of the draft because the stay or go decision was kind of easy after the combine. I love Darian Williams. We're going to be talking about him and NC State in just a minute. His decision was easy after the combine. Who else? Milos Uzanne. I actually think his decision was actually pretty easy. Did not play great at the combine. You go on and on down the list. There were just a lot of guys that didn't get the feedback that they wanted. Otega Oweh was really good at the combine, scored in double figures in both days of scrimmages. By the way, Karter Knox, I think he's going to be great next year, but he was another player. Had a good combine, but not a great one. Anyway, I bring it up because good combine, says he's all in. Does it change anything? I still don't think it does. Listen, I did a quick browse of all the mock drafts before we went live here. Unless something has changed again in the last couple hours. I think I saw one where he was maybe the 57th pick, 56th pick, whatever. By the way, wasn't Bronny the 56th pick last year? Anyway, it has nothing to do with anything. But I've seen a bunch where he's not selected at all. I've seen one, I think, where he was like one of the last 2 or 3 picks, and that was really it. And so listen, we always give this preface of 2 things. Is one, I never tell people what decisions they should make in life. It's your life. Do what you want. And if he decides to leave, that's totally on him. And there's always the possibility, hey, he just doesn't like school. He wants to be done. He wants to get his career going, whatever. But I also think that even with the success that he had at the combine, I do still think he's going to come back to Kentucky. And I'll say this, really 2 things with Kentucky in big picture, with and without Otega Oweh. One, if he's back, I know I said 24 hours ago, I think Karter Knox makes Arkansas the best team in the SEC. I was looking at Kentucky's roster earlier in the day, looking at what it would look like with and without Otega Oweh. I think it's hard to make the argument that anyone other than Kentucky is the favorite in the SEC. And frankly, beyond that, not just the favorite, I think Kentucky's a top 3-ish type team with Otega Oweh, because you bring him back. You think about a backcourt of Jalen Lowe, Otega Oweh, Denzel Aberdeen, Jasper Johnson are your top 4 guards. Find me a team that has a better top 4 guards than anyone in college basketball. You got Mo Diabate on the wing. You got the front court with Jaden Quaintance when he gets healthy, with Brandon Garrison, who all the offseason workout videos make him look like he's due for a breakout year. Malachi Moreno is going to play a role. Braden Hawthorne, who we talked about last week, is going to play a role. And so I just bring it up because I think Otega Oweh, he firmly puts them in. And I think there is something to star player coming back, knows expectations, knows what it's like to play for Mark Pope, what it's like to play at Kentucky. I do think you want that continuity from one of your better players because, listen, with no disrespect to the guys off the bench, but, Trent Noah, Colin Chandler, it's one thing to be a guy who played last year at Kentucky under Mark Pope. It's another thing to be a guy who played at Kentucky last year under Mark Pope that was like a star that, again, understands it. So I think Otega Oweh firmly puts them in the top 5, maybe the top 3, maybe the top 2, depending on how you feel about some of these other teams. The counter to that is I actually want to take a minute and give Mark Pope a little bit of credit, because I think it's not often that you can have a decision come this late and you feel like your roster is still in pretty good shape. And I feel like Mark Pope is kind of in this position where even if Otega Oweh doesn't come back, I still think Kentucky's going to be pretty good. Again, Jalen Lowe, super athletic point guard, great stats on a bad team. So imagine what it's going to be like with better players around him. Denzel Aberdeen, we saw the stats when he started last year at Florida, the impact that he had. We saw, by the way, Jaden Quaintance, Brandon Garrison, Mo Diabate, all of these guys we've talked about, Cam Williams that I haven't talked about, Jasper Johnson, Malachi Moreno. So I just bring it up because there's been a lot of schools where basically there were players that entered the NBA draft, and the school just said, we're going to move on without you. RJ Lewis at St. John's, Darian Williams at Texas Tech. Kentucky, it feels like, basically said, go test. If you're good enough, we'll figure it out. If you're not good enough, we really want you back. So I think Kentucky's one of the rare schools that will be in very good position, even if he doesn't come back. But I would expect that he does. Again, NBA draft deadline, May 28th. That's Wednesday. Many of you will be listening to this on Wednesday. And I do still think Otega Owe comes back. By the way, as producer Matt reminds me, make sure you're following our Torres on UK Twitter page for all your late-breaking Kentucky news. Really quickly, a couple other names that are still testing. The only really big one, producer Matt's trying to go back-to-back Final Fours just like Florida is, Todd Pedford. We don't really know what the heck's going on with him. One of my favorite players in college basketball. You know, I don't think his story has really been told. Like, a lot of people are kind of playing up that he didn't even start at Auburn this year. I don't think that's totally fair. He didn't start because they had 5 fifth-year seniors in that starting lineup. And so off the bench as a freshman in the SEC, we just talked about Karter Knox as a freshman in the SEC. Todd Pedford, 11 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, 36% three-point shooting as a freshman in the SEC. Well, he decides to declare for the draft, and I am not surprised that he has performed better than people expected. He's not the biggest guard, but he is a player that, like, the only reason we don't know more about him is because the team was so good and so deep around him that I just get the sense that a lot of people just don't realize quite how good he is. Well, he is very, very, very good. And we'll see what happens with him in the NBA draft. It sounds like he is looking for a first-round guarantee. I will tell you, and I actually saw Sam Vecini from The Athletic tweet out something about this right before I went on air. Listen, I'm not an NBA draft analyst. I can tell you, like, first-round guarantees are much, like, they don't happen that often. So we've seen guys like Yaxel Lendeborg, Todd Pedford. There's a couple others. Well, I want a first-round guarantee. It doesn't happen very often, especially for guys in like the 20 to 35, 20 to 40 range, because teams just don't know what's going to happen. What if a guy falls that they like? What if some superstar demands a trade and you need draft capital, right? What if you're I don't know the draft order off the top of my head, but the Houston Rockets, right? What do they have? Maybe the 23rd pick in the draft? Well, they're planning on using it now. But what if between now and then Giannis demands a trade? What if Ja Morant demands a trade? What if this player is available that they want to? You just don't know. And so this isn't a Giannis trade segment. It's a segment to say that things change, and when they do, you have to be nimble. And that's why there's very rare that you see a first-round guarantee that late in the process. So we'll see what happens with Pedford. If he's one that I do think if he comes back, it would be interesting. The team wouldn't be as talented, but the role would be much bigger for him. The counter to that is if he doesn't come back, I don't really know what Auburn would do. There is no comparable to Todd Pedford guy currently in the portal. So if they were to lose him, I think they'd be in trouble, but we'll find out here in the next day or so. By the way, two players that are in the portal